The Vreth ambassador had been speaking for 40 minutes and I was counting. Ceiling tiles. 214. Same as last session. His name was something I had learned to pronounce correctly 11 years ago in Chosen somewhere around year 3, too. Stop using. I called him the ambassador in my notes. My reports, my memory. A small thing. He had never noticed. That was the point. He was explaining with the particular patience of someone who expects no resistance why Earth needed to be reclassified as a provisional protectorate under hegemony, administrative oversight. He used words like cooperative, governance and protective stewardship, and resource optimization for mutual benefit. He had a gift for language. Every ugly thing he said came out, sounding like an invitation. I had a water glass in front of me. Earth glass, real glass, not the composite material the Concordat stations used for everything else. Someone in logistics always arranged it. His name was Darrell. Darrell had been putting real glass on the human delegation table for 16 years, without anyone asking him to do it and without ever mentioning it to anyone. I thought about Darrell a lot during sessions like this. I reached over and straightened the glass. It did not need straightening. I straightened it anyway. The Vreth ambassador finished his case. The room murmured. 214 delegations, 112 of which would vote. However, the hegemony suggested because the hegemony controlled 3 of the major shipping lanes and nobody wanted to be inconvenient. I had the floor next. I stood up. I had been a diplomat for 41 years. I know every register of my own voice, the way a musician knows a chord. I use the careful one, the measured one, the one that sounds like an open hand. I thank the assembly for their time. I acknowledge the ambassador's thorough presentation. I outlined in precise and reasonable terms why the reclassification of a sovereign human world as a protectorate of any external body was a violation of 6 specific Concordat founding articles, which I named by number, which I had memorized before I was 30. I was so reasonable the room almost fell asleep. That was the intention. I sat down. The motion was tabled for formal vote in 60 days. I picked up Darrell's glass and drank. 14. That was the number I always came back to. 14 human colony ships boarded by Vreth. Customs enforcement over 30 years. Without warrant, without cause, without consequence. 14 times the Concordat had reviewed the matter. 14 times the review had concluded with a recommendation for increased dialogue. 3 human scientists had been expelled from the Concordat Research Bureau for what the Bureau's internal report called cognitive repression. They had submitted peer-reviewed papers disagreeing with a Vreth hypothesis on dark matter distribution. The papers were correct. The scientists were gone. There was a girl named Petra. She had been born on Station Meridian 7 during a period when the Vreth had expanded their jurisdictional claim to include that sector. Under hegemony law, any person born inside their jurisdiction who was not registered as a hegemony affiliated was classified as a legal non-person. Petra had been 4 years old. The Concordat Legal Review Committee had spent 2 years determining whether a 4-year-old girl was a person. She was, they eventually decided. Narrowly. Petra liked beetles. I do not know why I remember that. Her mother had told me during one of the hearings the way people tell you small things when they're trying to stay calm. She collects them, not real ones. Pictures, she draws them on everything. She had drawings of beetles on the folders her mother brought to the hearing. I noticed them. I did not say anything about them. I was being reasonable. I set the glass down. Across the chamber the ambassador was speaking quietly with two of his aides. He did not look at the human table. He never looked at the human table after a session. There was nothing at the human table that required his attention. I gathered my papers. My aide, a young man named Cole who had been with me for 3 years and had learned very quickly not to ask me how I was feeling after sessions like this, fell into step beside me as I left the chamber. Same result, he said. Same result, I said. 60 days, he said. 60 days, I said. We walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the residential level. The doors closed. The station hummed around us, turning against the dark, going about its business. I had 41 years of sessions like this one in my memory, stacked up in neat rows. And I knew, the way you know a thing, you have been choosing not to examine, that I was getting close to the edge of a number. I did not know what the number was yet. I thought about Doril and his glass. I thought about reasonable men and what they were actually doing when they chose to be reasonable for 41 years. I thought about the ceiling tiles. 214. Always 214. The first transmission from Hestia 9 came in at 3:40 station time, and I was already awake. I was always already awake. Hestia 9 was an agricultural colony. 40,000 people, give or take, spread across 3 primary settlement zones. They grew a grain called teff and a modified root vegetable that had no earth equivalent but tasted, according to everyone who had tried it, like a sweet potato that had never been disappointed by anything. They were quiet people. They had been out there for 22 years and they had built something real, and they had never asked us for much. The transmission was automated. Emergency beacon, colony level. It gave coordinates and a distress classification and a timestamp and nothing else. I sat in my chair in the dark and I opened Concordat Emergency Protocol. Manual Section 7. I have read Section 7 so many times that I can recite it from memory. The pages are not worn because I keep it on a terminal now, but if it had been paper, the pages would have been worn. Step 1. Submit emergency contact form to the Concordat Security Council, filed under Colony Protection Clause 14b. Wait for acknowledgement within 6 hours. I submitted the form. I waited. The acknowledgement came in 4 hours and 50 minutes. Automated. It told me my form had been received and assigned a case number. The case number was R7741G. I wrote it down. I have a notebook that is full of case numbers like that. Step 2. Submit supporting documentation including colonial charter population census data and a formal threat assessment from a registered Concordat security evaluator. There was only one registered Concordat security evaluator available to the human delegation. His name was Owen, and he had been trying to retire for 2 years, and he answered my call on the second ring because Owen always answered on the second ring, and that was one of the things I liked about him. Hestia 9, I said. I saw it, he said. I'm already writing it. He sent me the assessment in 90 minutes. It was thorough and precise and used exactly the language the Concordat protocol required, and it meant nothing at all, and we both knew that, and neither of us said it. I submitted the documentation. Step 3. Request emergency session of the Security Council. The Security Council met on Tuesdays and Thursdays. It was Wednesday. I submitted the request for an emergency session. The automated response told me my request would be reviewed at the next scheduled meeting. Thursday. On Hestia 9, the second transmission came in at 1100. This one was not automated. A human voice, female, steady in the way. People get steady when they are holding something very heavy and cannot put it down. Her name was Lena. She was the colony's communications officer. She gave me a situation report in precise language, and she ended it with a sentence that was not in that language. She said, "Please tell me someone is coming." I was already writing the next form. Form 7 Alpha 9 Concordat Emergency Petition. Requires a signature from a VRETH Concordat Liaison Officer to be processed because Hestia 9 was in a sector that fell under shared VRETH Concordat Jurisdictional Oversight, a designation that had been agreed upon 11 years ago in a document I had not personally signed but that I had read at the time and had flagged 3 specific clauses in, and had been told by 4 different Concordat advisors that my concerns were noted. The VRETH Liaison Officer's office had been temporarily understaffed for 6 years. I submitted the form anyway. I submitted 19 forms over the next 12 days, not because I believed they would work, because I had learned a long time ago that when things go wrong, the record matters. What you did, when you did it, what response you received. The record is the only honest thing in a room full of reasonable people talking about procedures. Cole brought me food I did not eat and coffee I did drink, and he updated the case file, and he did not ask me how I was feeling. On day 14, the Security Council met and reviewed the emergency request and determined that the matter was under active assessment and that human delegation concerns have been formally noted. On day 16, another transmission from Lena, shorter this time. The steady voice was still steady. That was the part that made it harder to listen to. She did not ask for anything in this one. She gave me numbers. How many of the 3 settlement zones were still operational? The number had changed since the last transmission. It was smaller. On day 19, a transmission came in that was not from Lena. The voice was young. Hard to place, could have been a teenager, could have been younger. Static made it difficult. The transmission lasted 11 seconds. No case number. No formal designation. Just 11 seconds of a voice that had clearly been waiting near a communications console for a long time. Because when the connection opened, there was a pause before the words. The pause of someone who had not been sure anyone would pick up. Did they send someone? 11 seconds. That was all. I sat with my hand over my mouth for a while, not crying. I have not cried at work since a very long time ago, and I have made a practical decision to keep it that way, because crying takes time, and I had Forms to file. What I was doing was calculating. Cole came in at some point. I do not know what he saw in my face. Whatever it was, he did not ask. He sat down at his terminal and he began updating the case file. Cole, I said. Yes, he said. Open a new folder. Do not assign it a color. Call it after. He did not ask what after meant. Cole was a very good aide. I sat back in my chair. The Concordat vote on Earth's reclassification was in 4 days. I had preparing my delegation statement. For weeks, careful language measured. Argument, the kind of thing that gets noted in the record and changes nothing. I was still going to give that statement. Some part of me was still going to be reasonable right up until the moment I was not. But I opened my personal contact list. The one that was not on the Concord Act system. The one I had been building for 20 years, one name at a time, people I had gone to school with, served with, argued with for bad coffee and bad station cafeterias at 2:00 in the morning. People who had gotten tired of being reasonable a long time ago. People who had in the years since been doing other things. I had 41 names. I started at the top. Owen picked up on the second ring. Is it time? He said. I thought about Lena's voice in the 11-second transmission and the girl who drew beetles on everything. Not yet, I said. But I need you to be ready. I have been ready, he said. I believed him. I called the next name on the list. It was a long night. Long in a good way, the way a night is. Long when you are finally doing the thing you have been putting off and you can feel the weight of it lifting even though nothing has happened yet, even though you are still just making phone calls in a dark room with cold coffee and a case file full of unanswered forms. I called all 41 names. Every one of them picked up. Every one of them said some version of the same thing. I knew you would call. I did not thank them. I told them to wait. I told them I had one more thing to do. First, one more thing. I picked up Darrell's glass from the corner of my desk where I had brought it back from the chamber. I held it for a moment. Real glass. Heavy. Something that had traveled a very long distance to be here and had not broken. I eyed it down carefully. 4 days. The vote was 187 to 12. 15 abstentions. I had expected 16. Someone had changed their mind at the last moment, and I spent approximately 2 seconds wondering who before I let it go. It did not matter. Earth was reclassified as a provisional protectorate under VREPET Germany. Administrative oversight effective immediately upon ratification, subject to a 30-day formal review period during which no challenges would be entertained, because the review period was functionally a formality. Min, my interpreter, was knitting in the booth. She had been knitting since the session started, and she was nearly finished with what she called a situation hat, a wide-brimmed thing in gray wool that she made specifically during difficult sessions because she had explained to me once it gave her hand something to do so her face could stay neutral. She had made 11 of them in the years I had known her. I watched her finish the last row. The chair of the Concordat Assembly. Coordinator Ash, a Doan, an older woman, who had always been quietly fair and quietly ignored, turned to the human delegation table. Ambassador Voss, she said, the human delegation has the floor for Formal response. I stood up. I had written my statement 3 weeks ago. Revised it twice. It was good work, careful, measured. Built on 6 specific legal arguments that were all correct in all. Meaningless in this room where correctness had never been the deciding factor. I gave it 3 minutes and 40 seconds. Every word in its place. I thanked the Assembly. I expressed the human delegation's ongoing commitment to cooperative galactic governance. I formally registered our objection to the motion. I was so thoroughly, completely, professionally reasonable that I could feel the room relax. They thought I was done. I was not done. I looked at Min. She looked back at me over her knitting. She knew. She had been with me long enough to know. I switched to English. Not Concordat Standard. Not Universal Trade Dialect. Not any of the 6 languages I was formally certified to use on the floor of this assembly. English. My language. The one I had grown up with. The one I thought in when I was not performing anything for anyone. The room changed immediately. Not in any visible way. No one stood up, no one called a point of order. But I felt the change the way you feel, a pressure shift before weather. 214 delegations who had just been comfortable became, in the space of 3 seconds, uncertain. Uncertainty is useful. I spoke for 11 minutes. I am not going to reproduce all of it here because some of it was for the record and some of it was for me, and the line between those 2 things got blurry somewhere around minute 4. But I will tell you the shape of it. I named the colony ships, all 14 of them. I gave the date of each boarding, the Concordat case number assigned to each complaint and the outcome of each review. 14 case numbers. 14 times the word noted. I said Petra's name. I said that a 4-year-old girl should not have to wait 2 years to be legally confirmed as a person, and that no review committee and no jurisdictional clause and no quantity of careful diplomatic had ever made that sentence less true, and that I had known it was true for 2 years while I submitted the forms. I talked about Hestia 9. I did not describe it dramatically. I read the numbers, the 3 settlement zones, the transmissions, Lena's voice. I read them the way I had written them. In the case file, date, time, content. Response received. The response column, across 19 entries, said the same thing in different arrangements of the same words. I did not explain what that meant. I did not explain any of it. The room was very quiet. 214 delegations who had spent 41 years knowing that human diplomats were the most reasonable people in the galaxy were sitting with the realization that reasonable had never meant what they thought it meant. They had thought it meant limited. It did not mean limited. It meant patient. And then I got to the last thing. I had 1 sentence left. 1. I had written it down 2 days ago in my notebook, in the same notebook where I kept the case numbers, and I had looked at it several times, and I had not changed a single word of it. I said it. I said enough. 1 word. In English. Alone. Standing in the silence of a chamber where no translation was running. Not a declaration. Not a threat. A door closing. I sat down. Min put her knitting away. The coordinator looked at me for a long moment. Then she looked at her panel. Then she called a 30-minute recess. I used the recess to send one message. It went to 41 contacts simultaneously. It contained 2 words, their names, and now. What happened next took place over 48 hours, and I watched most of it from a chair in my office with cold coffee and Daryl's glass on the corner of the desk. Every human working in a Concordat, facing role, diplomatic, scientific, commercial, medical, technical, infrastructural, filed a leave of absence simultaneously. Not a resignation. A leave of absence. Leave of absence is a legal designation under Concordat labor code that requires no explanation, no prior approval, and no fixed end date. I had checked 11 years ago, actually. The first time the thought had occurred to me that someday I might need to know the difference. The leave requests hit the Concordat administrative system at 1400 hours. Station time, 41 minutes after my speech. The number was larger than anyone had expected. I do not think anyone had ever counted the humans. Not really counted them. They were there. They handled things. Things got handled. You do not count the air you breathe until the room gets smaller. The number was 412,631. Cole read it to me from his terminal. He had to read it twice because I asked him to. 412,631. I wrote it down in my notebook under the case numbers. The Concordat's administrative alert system generated a level 1 alert for the first time in 32 years. The last level 1 alert had been for a supernova in the rim sector. Cole showed me the alert notification. I looked at it for a moment. What is the Concordat's official response category for 400,000 people deciding they need a break? I asked. Cole thought about it. I do not think there is one, he said. No, I said. There is not. I drank the last of my cold coffee. Outside the window, the station turned. Stars did what stars do. The galaxy went about its business. For the first time in 41 years, it was doing it without us. Day 7 of the withdrawal, the Concordat Central Medical Exchange network went into what the official notification called an unplanned maintenance period. The Medical Exchange Network was the system by which 46 member species shared pharmaceutical research, surgical protocols, and emergency medical data across the Concordat's 83 inhabited sectors. It had been running continuously for 29 years. It had been maintained, updated, and administered by a team of 11 humans, based out of a station called Relay 4, a station so unglamorous and so important that most Concordat officials could not have told you where it was. All 11 of them had filed leave of absence on day 1. Cole brought me the notification on day 7 along with my coffee and a small succulent I had apparently left in his office by accident and which he had been keeping alive for me. He set both on my desk. I had 3 plants, 2 succulents, and something leafy I had been given as a gift by the Duan delegation 8 years ago and had never managed to identify. The leafy one was doing very well. I did not know why. I had done nothing special for it. It simply persisted, which I had come to find admirable. I watered all 3 while I read the maintenance notification. Are they asking for help? I said. Not officially, Cole said. Officially, they are managing the situation. And unofficially, he handed me a second document, a private message flagged through the Duan delegation's channel. They were using the Duan as an intermediary, which told me something about how the Concordat was reading the room. The message asked, in careful indirect language, whether human technical staff might be available to consult on the medical exchange situation. I set the message down. I picked up the succulent. I checked whether it needed water. It did not. I put it back. Not yet, I said. Cole wrote it down. Cole wrote everything down. It was one of the things that made him excellent at his job. By day 14, the list had grown. The Concordat's translation archive, 87 years of accumulated diplomatic documents, treaty language, and cross-species legal precedent had a human maintenance component that nobody had documented anywhere because it had simply always been handled. The component was now flagged as inaccessible pending access credentials. That belonged to a woman named Nora who was currently on leave and not required by any law to respond to credential requests. A navigation routing system that served 12 mid-tier sectors had begun issuing what the technical notification called inconsistent directional advisories, which meant when you followed it to its practical conclusion that ships following Concordat issued routes were arriving at the wrong places. A research station in the outer band had a bioscience project that required daily human oversight, something about the biological samples' response to specific atmospheric conditions, and the project had now been in unsupervised status for 2 weeks. I read all of these at my desk while I watered the plants. The leafy one needed a little extra. I gave it some. The Dune coordinator, Ash, requested a direct communication with me on day 17. Not through official channels. She reached out through men who had apparently maintained a private friendship with the coordinator for longer than I had known either of them, and who passed on Ash's request with a note that said simply, "She is trying." I accepted the call. Ash appeared on my screen looking the way she always looked, composed, careful, eyes that missed very little. She had been at the Concordat for longer than I had. We had disagreed on a great many things over the years and had managed to remain in some quiet and unspoken way, something adjacent to colleagues. "Ambassador Voss," she said, "thank you for taking the call." "Coordinator," I said, "what can I do for you?" She looked at me for a moment. "I want to ask you something directly. Is that all right?" "Of course," I said. "Are you angry?" she said. I looked at my plants. The leafy one was leaning very slightly toward the window, as it always did, pursuing the light with the single-minded practicality of something that knows what it needs and goes toward it. "No," I said. "We are done. Those are different things." She was quiet for a moment. I let the quiet sit. "I voted against the motion," she said. "I want you to know that." "I know," I said. "I read the record. I should have done more." "Yes," I said. "You should have." She absorbed that. I respected that she did not try to argue around it or reframe it. She sat with it. "What do you need?" she said. "Nothing right now," I said. "But when we are ready to talk, I would like it if you were in the room." "I will be there," she said. She was. I am getting ahead of myself. The Vreth sent a formal delegation on day 23. not a military one. They had discussed it internally, Cole told me, based on intercepted Concordat communications, but someone had apparently talked them out of it. A military response to a leave of absence is a difficult thing to justify in front of 214 assembled species. They sent diplomats instead. 3 of them, led by a senior hegemony representative I had met twice before. He was not the ambassador. The ambassador had quietly stepped back from this particular situation, which I found interesting. This representative was named in the Concordat system as Envoy Drell. He had a reputation for being more practical than ideological. They requested a meeting. I made them wait 4 days. This was not cruelty. I had actual work to do, and I had told Cole to tell them I would respond when I had availability. Cole had passed this along. Cole said their response to that message had been a silence that lasted approximately 15 seconds before the acknowledgement came. I met with Envoy Drell in a conference room. No real glass on the table. Concordat composite ware all around. He had brought a document, a formal apology from the Vretha hegemony, drafted in Concordat standard, reviewed by 3 legal offices, printed on official stationery. I read it. The document expressed regret regarding the perception of insufficient responsiveness to human colonial concerns during recent administrative periods. It apologized for any distress caused by the jurisdictional processing delays associated with Concordat Case R. 7741G and related matters. It used the phrase resource optimization to describe what had happened to Hestia. 9 settlement zones. Resource optimization. I set the document down. I looked at Envoy Drell. He had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. Not enough, but slightly. This document, I said in a very calm voice, describes the boarding of 14 colony vessels as jurisdictional navigation incidents. He said nothing. It describes a 4-year-old child's 2-year legal non-person status as an administrative classification delay. I said. He said nothing. It describes Hestia 9 as a resource optimization event, I said. I picked up the document. I set it back down carefully in the center of the table. I looked at the plants I had brought with me because I travel with my plants now, which is a choice I have made and will not be explaining to anyone. The leafy one was doing fine. I slid a folder across the table to Envoy Drell. It was thick, 216 pages. This, I said, is the document I would like to discuss. It was the renegotiation proposal. Every treaty, every agreement, every jurisdictional arrangement, every commercial understanding between human interests and breath-affiliated Concordat structures reviewed and revised. Not punitive. Precise. Every imbalance corrected. Every clause that had quietly benefited hegemony interests at human cost rewritten. Every arrangement where human labor, knowledge, and maintenance had been providing value that was not formally acknowledged or compensated formalized. It was, in total, a correction. Not a conquest. A correction. Drell opened the folder and looked at the first page. This will take months to review, he said. Yes, I said. It will. The Concordat cannot function at current capacity during this withdrawal period. No, I said. It cannot. He turned another page. You knew, he said. Not accusing. Almost impressed. You knew how much was dependent on your people and you never. We never leveraged it, I said. Yes. For 41 years. He looked at the folder. I looked at the leafy plant. I would like to begin, Drell said. I know you would, I said. I will let the coordinator know we are ready to talk. I stood up. Cole appeared from the corner where he had been sitting very quietly the whole time, in the way Cole sat quietly during meetings, and he held the door. I paused on the way out. Envoy Drell, I said. He looked up. I want you to understand something, I said. This is not what happens when humans are angry. This is not a war. This is not a threat. I picked up my leafy plant. This is what happens when humans are tired, I said. We are not the same thing. I walked out. Behind me, I heard him turn another page. 3 years later, I was sitting in the same chamber, same ceiling, 214 tiles. I had stopped counting them a while back, somewhere around month 4 of the renegotiation period, sometime between the 47th session and the 52nd. I had simply stopped needing to count. The ceiling was the ceiling. It had not changed. The chamber looked the same. The coordinator sat in the same chair. The delegations filled the same seats. The interpreters sat in their booths. Min was in hers, but she was not knitting. She had not brought her knitting in 8 months. She said she did not need it as much anymore. I had noticed. I had not said anything. What had changed was not visible. Exactly. It was more like a temperature change. A shift in the way species moved in the corridors outside the chamber, the way they occupied space near human delegation members. A new awareness that had settled into the bones of the place, like something that had always been there but had required a significant event to become conscious. The awareness was this: humans were not soft. They had never been soft. They had been making a choice. Yara was at the delegation table. She was 26 years old, and she had come up through the Concordat diplomatic tracks. Newest cohort, the one that had started after the renegotiation, the one operating under new terms that now required actual reciprocity in the placement and compensation of human personnel across Concordat structures. She had grown up knowing the outcome of the previous 41 years, not as history, as context. The way people who grow up after a war know about the war, not from being in it, but from living in what it made. She had never submitted a Form 7 Alpha. Neither. She did not have a notebook full of case numbers. She had other things. I was watching her manage a dispute between the Cheyenne and the Kelith, two small species with a deep disagreement about water rights on a shared moon. She was managing it the way a person manages a fire, not by drowning it, not by stepping back, but by getting in close enough to understand the shape of it and then redirecting it into something useful. She was warm. That was the thing about Yara. She had warmth that was not performance. She cared about the Cheyenne, and she cared about, and she held both of those things at once without losing either of them. And in the room you could feel it. The delegations on both sides gradually stopped defending and started talking. She did not check her notes once. Cole was sitting next to me. He was not my aide anymore. He had his own portfolio now, too. Sectors over, and he was very good at it. He had come to this session as a courtesy because it was my last one and because Cole was the kind of person. She is good, he said quietly. Yes, I said. She reminds me of. Do not, I said. He did not. He smiled instead. The Shayon-Keleth dispute resolved in 4 hours. Yara walked out of the secondary chamber, with both delegations looking like they had reached something rather than given up something, which is the difference between a good outcome and a settlement that falls apart in 3 years. She saw me in the corridor. She nodded once, the way young diplomats nodded, very senior ones when they're not sure of the protocol. The nod that is trying to convey respect without being obvious about it. I nodded back. She went off to her next thing. There was always a next thing. My last session began at 1400 hours. The matter before the floor was the formal adoption of the revised trade equalization standards, a set of guidelines 3 years in development that govern the compensation and recognition of technical and administrative labor across all concordat structures and required explicit disclosure of any dependency relationships between species systems. The document was 118 pages long. It bore, in the acknowledgement section, a list of 41 names. My name was not in that list. I had specifically asked that it not be. The 41 names were the people who had answered the phone in the dark, who had been ready before I asked, who had done the actual work of 3 years of renegotiation sessions and technical audits and formal reviews and very long conversations with Envoy Drell, who had turned out, once the initial discomfort had passed, to have a functional conscience and a genuine willingness to do the work. Owen's name was at the top. I had called him the night before to tell him, he had said in the tone he always used, for things that mattered to him, good. The vote on the trade equalization standards was 197 in favor, 11 opposed, 6 abstentions, 197. I cast the human delegation's formal approval vote. I pressed the confirmation. The panel registered the result. I closed the voting folder. I picked up Daryl's glass. Daryl had retired 2 months ago. He had put real glass on the human table at every session for 19 years and on his last day he had sent me a note that said only, I figured someone should. I kept the glass. I drank. The coordinator called the session closed. People began to gather their things. The chamber began its familiar process of emptying. Delegations filtered out in their usual patterns. The interpreters shut down the translation systems. The support staff moved through with quiet efficiency. Cole was gathering my papers. He did not need to. I was perfectly capable of carrying my own papers. But he had been gathering my papers for 6 years, and I was not going to stop him on the last day. I was looking at the Vreth section of the chamber. The ambassador, my ambassador, the one I had been unnaming in my memory for 11 years, had not been in the chamber. Today, he had stepped down from his position 8 months into the renegotiation when it had become clear that the new terms were real and permanent, and that his particular approach to cooperative governance was no longer a viable diplomatic strategy. His replacement was younger, more careful, better at listening. In the second row of the Vreth Delegation, there was a young man I had not seen at sessions before. He had the look of someone on there. First rotation, attentive in the effortful way of people who are not yet sure what to pay attention to still. Learning where the important moments are. He caught me looking. He looked away immediately. Then, after a moment, he looked back. I had been about to follow Cole out of the chamber. I did not follow Cole. The young man stood up from his seat and walked toward me across the emptying chamber with the deliberate, slightly tense body language of someone who has been deciding whether to do something for a while and has finally decided. He stopped at what I judged to be a carefully chosen distance. Respectful, not close enough to seem aggressive, not far enough to seem afraid. He spoke, not in Concordat standard, in English, not fluent English, learned English, careful English, the English of someone who has been practicing specific sentences. But the words were clear. Ambassador Voss, he said. I am Envoy Drell's associate. I am new. I know, I said. He looked at me for a moment. He had Drell's quality of genuine attention. I recognized it and appreciated it. I wanted to ask you something, he said, if that is acceptable. Go ahead, I said. He took a breath. The kind of breath people take before they say the thing they actually came to say. What is it you wanted, he said. From us. All those years. All the forms and the sessions and the reasonable. What was it that you wanted from us? The chamber was nearly empty. Min was putting her things in her bag. The coordinator was speaking with two aides near the dais. Cole was standing near the door with my papers under his arm, patient as he had always been patient, not watching us but aware of us in the way Cole was always aware of everything. I looked at this young man who had learned English specifically to ask me this question, and I thought about the 41 years it covered. The notebooks full of case numbers. Lena's voice on a transmission. The girl with the beetle drawings on her folders. The 14 ships. The glass on the table. The 11-second message from a voice that might have been a child. I picked up Darrell's glass from the table. I held it for a moment. Real glass. Heavy. Something that had traveled a long way and had not broken. I thought about what I could say. I thought about the ways the answer could be packaged diplomatically, historically, strategically. I could give him a thesis. I could give him a summary. I could give him the kind of measured, reasonable, carefully framed response that had been my professional instrument for 4 decades. I thought about all of that. I set the glass down. I did not answer him. I looked at him and I let the question stand in the air between us, and I held his gaze for 3 seconds, which is longer than it sounds. Then I turned and walked to the door, where Cole was waiting. What I needed him to carry back into every meeting and every document and every conversation he would have for the rest of his career was not something I could hand to him in a sentence. The answer was not a policy or a complaint or a historical accounting. The answer was the fact of his question itself, that he had asked it in English, in this chamber, on this day, after everything that had preceded it. 41 years of sessions, 41 years of reasonable, 14 case numbers, the form that required of breath, signature to process in the office that had been temporarily understaffed for 6 years. Petra, Lena, the 11 seconds, the 41 names, the 197 votes. The answer to his question was all of that, and if I had said it out loud, I would have taken it from him. I would have given him a sentence to hold instead of a weight to carry. And the weight was the thing that would do the work. Cole held the door. I walked through it. The corridor outside the chamber was bright and busy, people moving in the purposeful way of people who have many things to do. A galaxy I had spent decades learning to read, going about its business the way it always had. Somewhere on a station I did not know. The name of Petra was 14 years old and had never had to wait for anyone to decide she was a person. Somewhere in the outer band, a bioscience project was running with full human oversight, the atmospheric conditions calibrated correctly, the samples developing the way they were supposed to develop. Somewhere on a moon I had never visited, 2 small species were working out an agreement about water rights that might actually hold. And somewhere behind me, in an emptying chamber, a young man with careful English was standing next to a table with a water glass on it, holding a question I had left open on purpose. That was the part no one would write about. Not the speech, not the leave of absence, not the renegotiation, not the 197 votes. Those things were in the record. They would be studied and cited and argued over for a long time. The part no one would write about was what happened after a species that had been patient for 41 years was finally heard. They went back to being patient. But it was different now. The galaxy knew what the patience was made of. It knew the distance between choosing not to act and being unable to act. It knew, in the slow and permanent way, that things become known, that the kindness had never been weakness and the reasonableness had never been limitation. And the forms filed in the dark at 3:40 station time were not the behavior of a species that could not do otherwise. They were the behavior of a species that had decided, until it decided differently. I pressed the button for the ground floor. The door closed. The elevator hummed. Outside the windows, the station turned. And the stars did what they always did. And the galaxy went about its business. And I rode down in the quiet with Darrell's glass in my hand and the leafy plant under my arm, heading toward nothing in particular, in no hurry at all, for the first time in 41 years. That was enough. That had always been enough. I just had to wait until it was time to say so.